Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the Discover Virginia Beach podcast, where we set out to discover, explore, and define exactly what it is we want to do when we're experiencing the Virginia area. And I'm joined today by a super special guest, not technically in Virginia. However, this is a tremendous man, business owner, and good friend of mine, Zach. Zach McDonough. I don't even think I've said
McDonough. That's all right.
I've just called him Zach this whole time.
That's fine.
He's a very personable guy. So Zach is joining me today. He is a licensed real estate agent in the Southern Maryland area, correct? Mm-hmm. So
Yep.
Zach specializes in some really cool real estate deals that I've appreciated from afar. He's a big adventure seeker, and we are going to have a really cool conversation today, just talking about this idea of discovery, regardless of what area or stage in life you're in. And we're also going to be diving deep into some fun conversations about real estate investing. So I've got a really great episode ready for you guys. So buckle up. Let's get started. Zach, welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing me on, and I'm ready to have some fun.
Absolutely. Well, Zach, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Maybe give the audience a little bit more idea about your skill set, as well as who you are.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Zach. Born and raised about 30 minutes south of DC in a little town called Accokeek that most people don't know, which is great. That's why I like to say that word, Accokeek. And so born and raised there, went to school to be an engineer, decided that I wasn't really fit for it. And I finished school, but I just really got into this real estate thing, had an early in for real estate and did a lot of construction as a high school, college age kid. And that got me excited about the construction side of real estate, which led me to get in this game. But really have been sort of in my craft for about 3 years now. Started in March 2020, which is a scary time to have started, but also was exciting and taught me a lot of tough lessons. But I love what I do. I really specialize with working with investors on the agent side. I'm an investor myself, and I own about 7 properties under contract for number 8. Hopefully we'll be under contract for a bigger property here soon, but I don't want to spoil it. Just having a ton of fun. Again, I got started. I was an athlete at a young age and maybe a good competitor, and I transferred those skills into real estate and business, even though I wasn't really that good of an athlete. But I love what I do. Again, have a lot of fun. I work with great business partners, and that's a little bit of synopsis about me. I could get a little deeper into it, but I'll let you kind of do your thing.
Absolutely. Well, Zach, thank you for sharing that. And those of you familiar with the podcast, if you listen to the past few episodes, we've been really diving deep into people who own their own business and are in a stage and season of life that is in a part of a transition. So, Zach, I want to go back to March 2020, not the COVID side of things, because I feel like we've already been kind of beat up with that. But did you say you got your license in March 2020?
Yeah, no. So I got my license later than that, but that's when I started investing. And so basically with my journey as an agent specifically was I started investing. I was early on to the idea that I wanted to brand myself, and I didn't really know what business would take me by storm. Funny enough, the way I got into investing in real estate was at a young age. Like I mentioned, doing construction. I had an uncle that did commercial real estate, and he always pushed me to push myself and say, get in this game as early as you can, and that's the way you can win. And so I actually had a little business while I was in college. I was doing like e-commerce and things like that. I know people hate it, but drop shipping, people hated that, right? But I did that, and I was very successful at it, surprisingly enough. I spent a lot of late nights putting together different, strategies and systems in place, and I built a little business, and I just realized that I didn't feel like I could do that. It didn't have that business didn't have legs. It felt like I could tell some of the trends of way I just didn't think it was going to stick around. So I figured out the money I made, I reinvested it and just put it right into real estate. And so I bought my first house. So that was a house hack of sorts. I learned a lot of tough lessons. My first sort of roommate turned out to be a drug dealer. That was kind of scary. That's a whole story. But it was crazy. And so that was a tough lesson. And that was really the worst of it. But I discovered that a few months later when I went back home after school, was out for the semester. Cause again, I was in college. while I bought this place and I was working to get my degree, and I came back, I kind of discovered some some evidence that there was some not good business going on, and fortunately I was able to work it out with the tenant and get him out. But that was like a really scary part of me starting this investing journey. So I just started making.
We're gonna have to dive into that story a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely can. But basically the trajectory of it was I started doing more investments over the next year or so. And people just gained traction from my branding, and people were like, hey, can you help me? And I was like, well, I might as well get a license, because I mean, I'm fun to help people do every step of the way. I might as well be a part of the transaction and have, broker the transaction. So that's basically what I've done. And just built upon that and turned, one deal into two and two into four and four into eight or whatever, in terms of, helping people and just trying to stack sort of my experiences and help other people do what I do. That's really what my business model is, which is super fun. And I work with a lot of aligned people with my interests and trying to grow their portfolio and grow wealth. So it's really fun.
Absolutely. Well, there is a lot of great stuff that you touched on, Zach, and I definitely want to be able to unpack this, especially for the audience. So a lot of the folks that I've connected with on our Facebook group, Discover Virginia Beach, and also just people I've talked to in general about real estate are always so hesitant about taking that first step. So I really appreciate you unpacking that, okay, you had an entrepreneurial spirit, but it wasn't e-commerce necessarily. It was a little bit bigger than that. It's so funny that you say March 2020. That's actually when I got licensed as a realtor as well. I was one of the last classes to pass the certification level before they shut down for COVID. So it's definitely, and I'm sure you're well adept to this too. It's like, there are times in life where it may be even super scary on like a personal and a global level, but that doesn't mean you still shouldn't take your shot. You still should take your opportunity to perform what it is you're after.
Yeah, I think there's a considerably large amount of evidence to show that some of the best businesses come out of the worst times to do it. And, I think to speak to some of the things you just said too, is like how it's scary and how there's people are hesitant. I mean, for looking at my situation, like, and how I started and how it was sort of my kind of the worst way I started, I have done a lot better since then. I do have a much better ability to pick out good tenants. Was just like, I felt like I had to learn some stuff, but I really didn't apply knowledge very well. And like when I picked that first tenant, like I failed every test that would have been given. Like, for example, didn't pull background, didn't pull credit, didn't really do a lot of due diligence. I just felt eager to get somebody to sign, and I was worried about covering my base, covering my mortgage. So I just kind of pulled trigger too soon versus like doing that due diligence. And what I basically ended up doing was doing a sort of cash for keys in that situation where I was like, hey, man, we can't do this thing. Can I just, pay you out of your lease a certain amount, and we agree for basically a mutual termination of the lease. And basically I paid for time for him to transition into a new place. And that was basically how we made that work. So people are like, oh man, it's scary to get in, but there's solutions to problems, and there's plenty of forums out there. Like I love Bigger Pockets. Don't know if you've heard of that, but I love Bigger Pockets. And like, I just hit that forum and I was like, I don't know what to do. And people gave me advice and it worked out. Like I just tried what I could. So I think that's the way to go. I think with the e-commerce thing, to speak to, how I felt bigger than that. I think that was a great business. I just didn't have the capital to make it work to graduate to the next level. Dropshipping requires no capital, but I was like, I don't think this dropshipping thing going to stay around because of some of the talks around the policies and different platforms that I was doing it on, specifically Amazon. So for me, it was like, my advice to people out there that want to get started is start where you can start. Like you have cards, play the cards you can play, and then try to see if you can stack up to the next thing. Because I couldn't have invested in real estate without e-commerce, but I realized that e-commerce, there was a point where I had to graduate from it as well for the model I was doing. So I know it's a little bit long-winded, but definitely like take things one step at a time. Start where you can,
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to jump into this term here, and I am a fan of the Bigger Pockets podcast. That's a great resource and forum. Aside from calling myself or you, Zach, for real estate needs, or questions in our area. But when it comes to this term, house hacking, can you break it down? Explain it to me like I'm five, in the words of
Sure.
my
I think the simple way to state it is you buy a house, live in the house, and rent out different portions of the house to try to meet ends meet. So, or meet your mortgage. So, for some people that could be bedrooms. For some people that don't want to rent out bedrooms because they have, wife and kids or husband and kids. Maybe it's a basement. Maybe it's an extra dwelling unit, an accessory dwelling unit that's on the property. So it comes down to buying and living while renting out different portions of the house, whatever that is. So that's the simplest way to do it. For example, for me, it was a 5-bedroom house, live in one of the bedrooms, rent out the other 4 for roughly $600 to $700 a month, depending on the bedroom. And basically at that point, if you do that math, let's call it, 4 times 700, that's $2,800. Mortgage is roughly $2,000, depending on what priced home you're buying and where it's at in a specific target area that you're looking. And so now you're $800 in the green and you live in the house. So that's kind of the math that you play with when you're doing the house hacking. And on top of it, you guys, and Joseph should know this too very well, is if you live in a house, you get really fantastic loan terms. You get your, if you're first time home buyer, you can get 3%. You can get as little as 0% down, depending on rural development or whatever kind of loans you have in your area. And FHA is 3.5%. Conventional, if you're not a first-time home buyer, is 5%. So, there's all these really great low money down loan programs. It's a great way to get started as an investor, and it's a great way to have very little out of pocket. So it's sort of crazy, even from an investor standpoint, if you're not super into the numbers, but if you are at the same time, it's like, okay, $800 a month times 12, what's that? Almost 10 grand. So if you only had to bring $30,000 to closing, you just got a 33% return on your investment. I don't know any investors that get those good investments on their first one.
Yeah, within the first year, you're netting that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So interesting. I appreciate you breaking that down too, because there's something to be said about like the term hacking. Like a lot of people think of it in like a negative connotation.
Sure.
But I just think of it as like maximizing your investment or utilizing your resources are the things I think about, especially in our area too. Like Hampton Roads, Virginia Beach area is very prominent for a military population. So you're working with a military family. I've worked with a couple. I was going to point to them there, the stickers on the back of my computer, but I'll shout out to Doty Properties. One of my first military couples, they bought and they just started buying houses with their VA loan, because you can use your VA loan more than once for veterans out there, if you didn't know that. And then also too, it's like no money down for that first deal. Depending on your loan terms, you can get really competitive interest rates compared to sometimes even the first time home buyers. So there's definitely lots of opportunity there. Another thing I wanted to chat with you about, Zach, as we kind of transition into the next segment here, which is about your area specifically. Are there any other resources or tools that you like to use as far as forums or community chats or maybe calculators go, that you could share with us here today?
Sure. So in terms of like my investment side, honestly, a lot of the stuff that I use is my own. I've populated by my needs. I could try to produce something so that you could, put it in the show comments or whatever. I also have used Bigger Pockets. They do have calculators on their platform. I personally like my own just because I can operate them a little faster rather than mine are Excel based versus like a web based one is, it's based on your internet, things like that. Sometimes I'll go to a coffee shop and work on something that I just want to get away, and maybe my internet's not great there. So I don't really like to be too reliant on other people's resources. Now, in terms of like other things I use, man, I think that, the resources that I have are as an agent, MLS, right? But for me, when I have an investor client that wants to try to look at these types of things, like wants to run numbers, I tell them to leverage me and get access to the MLS through my means. And so I can produce searches for them. I can produce things for them because it's going to be a little bit more accurate. And there's a lot more flexibility on the data standpoint from the MLS versus like going to a Zillow or going to a Redfin that can be useful. Now, in terms of the house hack, I think a great place to even start for running numbers is sometimes Facebook. I know that seems really, really silly, but you can go and find sold listings on Facebook of rent by room situations or rent by an apartment or whatever. And I know in your area, Portsmouth, Norfolk, Chesapeake, Hampton Roads, there's lots of duplexes and quads. So a house hack situation could be a really, really nice build out for even a family that wants to use a VA or a USDA or a conventional. And well, conventionals have just shifted the rules on that, but FHA and have a really low money down and rent out a separate unit. But it could be a really, really advantageous opportunity for buyers out there as well. But you guys could go on Facebook and look up sold listings and try to find something within like a 10-mile radius. And you can go back pretty far and find stuff and use it to comp out what a rental is going to go for, which is pretty fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's something to be said too about what you kind of started down this checklist for you, Zach. And I there's a common theme here that a lot of people might be have a misconception about or false pretense, and that is it costs a lot of money to get started. Obviously, we're not selling anything here. We're having a conversation about what free resources are out there. And obviously, you want to consult with a lending professional when it comes to what type of down payments and programs you're part of. But not once during that spill, Zach, did I hear that you went out and paid somebody $10,000 to teach you everything you knew about real estate or hiring a guru. Zach, tell me a little bit more about this landscape of gurus in real estate know-hows. What do you think about those programs that charge people lots of money?
I think it's very I think it's misleading. I think it's tough because if you have an average person that wants to get in and they have a certain, you have these gurus that are pricing out their programs based on what they think that their ideal customer can afford. So if you have a program that's $1,000, like a lot of investors want to start with $1,000, well, I think that money would be better spent on not being spent at all, really, and finding online resources like YouTube. I love YouTube, man. YouTube University is the best. I'm not a big fan of guru culture in our world. I think there's a place for it, but I think it's not the beginner. It's not even necessarily the intermediate kind of player. It's really a high level player that is trying to get to a higher level than that. So I think that's where that plays in. Like, I don't want to totally discourage everybody that I've had some success. I've paid for coaching. I've paid for things like that, but it's definitely not how I started. And if you want to play that and you want to go that route, I would really, really encourage you to do a tremendous amount of due diligence and definitely find somebody that's already done coaching or done some kind of guru course with that particular person or entity that you're going to be operating with. Because I'm just really not a big fan of the fact that I think you can get a lot of knowledge from just taking time, and there's really no fast tracking your success or your knowledge base. It's just going to have to be, sweat and hard work from you as an individual. So that's the tough sell. I know that sucks. People go like, oh, I want the silver bullet. I want the secret sauce. Give it to me, Zach or Joseph. But this is not the reality, guys. We have to work. It's been, for me, like I'm a very young operator in terms of real estate, but I've been really studying and learning for so long before I ever even got into the game. And you can start now, but find somebody that's educated, like a realtor or a lender that has some experience in what you're trying to do, and then they can guide you. And they're already going to help you anyway because it's already part of the transaction. It's what's needed. Absolutely. So it's like, again, that's what we go back to what we started with, the steps. Take it as we go rather than like, oh, I'm going to drop 25 grand on a course. It's like, man, you just better off buying a house and getting started, because you might spend that 25 grand and realize this isn't for you, but you got to live somewhere. So.
And you brought up an interesting point too, as you were kind of walking us through that. And I appreciate you sharing your input on gurus. They definitely do have a place as far as coaching and leveling up. But when it comes to starting out, I mean, it's as simple as partnering with a local realtor who's familiar with the area and also familiar with the comps. I know during COVID, especially, I talked with a lot of people who were in real estate investing. I'm using quotation marks if you can't see them. you're listening to the audio, but a lot of people wanted to get into real estate investing, but they didn't necessarily have any of the capital or the know-how. They're just like, send me properties. And it's so much more than sending properties and houses. Like, yes, that is like the main thing you see on the front end, but it's also like knowing the area of what can sell and rent for. Like,
Yeah.
Absolutely, if you're going to be in Virginia Beach duplex, you're going to be paying almost double than you would a Portsmouth duplex, just because of where it is relative to the area, so to speak.
Sure.
So with that said, Zach, I want to jump into this next segment here, and we are definitely going to come back to real estate too, because I know you have some really cool tips to share with us about how to get started. But walk me through this. So if somebody is looking to get started in the real estate space, let's say they've connected with the agent, they're looking for deals, and maybe they're pre-qualified for, not maybe just, what's relatively average in their price point. Are there any good strategies or procedures that you have in your own business that you feel like are able to be replicated, that are just good core principles?
Yeah. So, ways I could replicate it. So there's a couple things I think about in terms of that. So, we've talked about this house hack topic, and I hate to just beat that dead horse, but it is a really great way in terms of investing to get started and flirt with that sort of model of being a real estate investor, but with really low impact. Now I do think in terms of structure, if you really want to get into sort of how to model an investment, how to model, your housing thing. And when I bring clients in, how we talk about things is obviously there's an order of things. And you mentioned some of these, the order, right? Like, for example, when somebody comes to me and wants to invest, and they want to go and purchase something, right? Pre-qual is the first thing we got to do. We got to go get you pre-approved, because we got to realize that you need to understand where you're going to be investing, right? So you mentioned Portsmouth versus Virginia Beach. I think, if you can only afford Portsmouth prices, we're not going to go try to invest in Virginia Beach. That's just not how we're going to do it. Or we're not going to go try to do it in Norfolk or whatever other neighborhoods that are expensive. Then we have to understand, okay, so now we got the price point, right? So we're going to identify some other aspects of the deal. Now we got to understand, okay, who's going to be our end customer? Do we want a Section 8 sort of style of investment, because that is, a different kind of tenant? Do we want typically, your multifamily versus your single family? Your single family tenants are typically going to be considered higher quality tenants, because the people that are seeking out what's similar to owning a house, that's going to be their own space, their own unique space, versus a multifamily or quadplex is going to be a shared space. And usually those tenants are going to be harder on the property. That's just data. That's statistics. That's not me not trying to be at all upset anybody, but that's the reality of things. So now we go, okay, what's our strategy? Now let's try to find locations. Let's find, a radius that we want to play, and say, okay, now we're modeling how many beds, how many baths, what's our square footage. For example, I really like 2-bedroom homes that are like over 1,200 square feet, because I realize that's a lot of space for a 2-bedroom home. So I can maybe put a new bedroom in there. So people are going, wait, let me circle that back to that, what I just said. So a 2-bedroom, let's say 2-bath or 1-bath, over 1,200 square feet. That's a very large 2-bedroom home. That is, if that's a standalone home. So then I could try to find a space to create a bedroom in there. Why would I add a new bedroom? Because it adds value. You talked about resources. Something I forgot to mention was, in every city, every county, you should be able to find fair market housing rent prices in your area. And this is very important for people that are coming into a new area, like they're going to be moving to Virginia Beach, and they're watching this podcast and they want to do some kind of investing, but they don't know what the prices are before they talk to a realtor. You should be able to find something about the county that would tell you the base rent for a 2-bed, a 3-bed, a 4-bed, up to 5 or whatever, and that'll give you probably your floor. So, for me, I like to invest in something in C, D class areas, but I like to produce A, B class renovations and rentals, so that if my base is $1,200 for a 2-bedroom in a certain county, like my local county that I work mainly in is St. Mary's County, it's roughly $1,200. I'm going to try to run my numbers there, but I'm going to make my place beautiful enough that I think I can get $200 to $300 more than that. So That's a specific strategy that I've already done. I'm very close to a naval base myself, where my market is. It is Pax River. Love them. We have very similar thing. It's cyclical in terms of how people come in and out. So there's a lot of rental demand. Well, there's this neighborhood right in front of the naval base, very similar to how it is in Portsmouth area, that the areas are very rough. So I come in there, I try to pick up good deals, and I try to flip them around, make them very nice. So people that are working on base or supporting the base some way want to live close to the base, live in a little cheaper of an area for rent, but they see my place, they love it, and they rent for me. So that's an example of a top to the bottom strategy. Some of the things that I do in my business are house hack. Don't do that as much anymore because I'm pretty settled in where I'm living, but I try to do fix and rents. And again, that's a BRRRR process. We can talk a little bit about that, buy rent. So I don't know how you want me to turn this. I can try to, talk a little more about BRRRR. I can talk about other strategies. We can kind of go back to identifying how many beds, baths that you want. So what we want to do is try to take, if there's a 300 listings in your market, you want to try to really narrow down on what comes in through your target. Like, what do you want? What's your ideal product that's on ideal inventory? And we want to get that. And we want to strike, because most of the time buying, and this works for buying and investing, it's just clarity, guys. It's identifying what you need, what you guys are looking for in a house, whether you're going to be living in it and you and your family are going to occupy it, or whether you're going to rent it. It's
Absolutely.
all the same principles.
Yeah, Zach, I've used the word absolutely. I'm tracking it in my head just because, like, I've said it so many times, but that just goes to show just how much you're on par and on track with, like, not only your marketplace, but also real estate investing in general, because it does have a lot of shared principles, which is why I definitely wanted to talk with you, Zach. It's long overdue for a conversation, but really appreciate you sharing that, and also giving the tip of, just because there are, quote, 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, doesn't mean you can't utilize the square footage of the house to add another bedroom or a quarter bath, or, possibly convert one of the garage areas into something more, depending on your skill set. Now, I want to touch on one thing with you, Zach, and that's more of a personal preference. Having talked to, I talked to probably 300 investors my first year in the business, just because I was looking for conversations. I was looking to grow and expand my business. And I met with a lot of people that wanted to invest in real estate. Now, when it comes to price point, and let's say we find a house that's super affordable, super on track with your price point, maybe it's even lower, but it requires a lot of work to perform in order to get it to that, maybe not an A, B status, which is like, I would call like luxury apartments, right? B is average, C and D is just, affordable housing. When it comes to red flags, what are some red flags that you look for in a property that tell you that the low price does not justify the spend of getting everything fixed up?
So I think that a really good thought before I start to throw out different aspects for people that are watching is anything that an able-bodied person couldn't roll their sleeves up and figure out are things that you want to consider red flags. For example, I and Joseph are not going to get together and get a couple tools and fix the foundation of a property. We're just not going to do that.
Looking at my pen right here. This is about as big of a tool as I use, this pen right here.
Right. And so that's one thing. Another thing we wouldn't consider too, and even though we might be able to get together and do this, but on a nice warm day, we probably wouldn't, is like a roof. I'm not afraid to buy a house with a bad roof, but here's what the issues are for an investor coming in is most of the time an investor coming in is going to use a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, a traditional lending product, and a bad roof usually is not going to cut it with those kind of lenders. So this is part of the idea of what we started with, is about knowing your strategy, knowing what's in your wheelhouse, because you might see that cheap price tag, but if the house is falling over, roof's bad, you guys don't really have well and septic in your area, do you?
In the Suffolk area and some of the older homes in Portsmouth, Norfolk, we have like oil tanks and wells that have been like covered, but typically not a big issue here.
So in my area, more rural, we have a ton of sewer and public water, but we also have a ton of septic and wells. So that's something that, like, if those are shot, you're talking about a big price tag. So we want to think about money when we think about what makes an investment work. And the big heavy hitters are definitely going to be your structure, your roof, your HVAC can be very expensive. it can, like, it really can add up. Especially if you have no HVAC at all and you have a very large house, like a very large, I don't know, historic house in your area, like running miniature, like mini splits and things like that, or running ductwork, like it can get up for a really good company to do it. It's going to be 12 to 15K. Like for me, I figured out how to get good relationships and I do enough volume that I can get those prices under 10. But like, that's not always the case. I look at houses and I go, this is not going to be my $10,000, HVAC heat pump system. So, HVAC's definitely a big one. And again, like things, if you don't know if there's something I may be missing, which I don't think there is, but you have to think about, could you do it yourself? And if you couldn't, or even if you're not, could an average able-bodied person, if you're not a handy person, but could you figure it out with enough time? If you couldn't do it yourself, you require some kind of license to do it. It's probably something you need to consider getting priced out and then figuring out whether it's going to be in your wheelhouse or not. Another thing is you could consult your lender and figure out what kind of repairs would be lender required. And there's a lot of that stuff. You can find a lot of literature online for that. So I won't speak to that too much. But the main things I said are things that I look for and I go, maybe your strategy is to look at all those things and get excited about them and because you know what they cost, and maybe that's your strategy, but you need to know whether you're going to go for that if you're not. And I know investors that take them on. They love all those things. They look for those problems and they hope that they're there because they think they can get deeper discounted deals. But it takes a long time. Getting a new well takes a long time. You got to go through the county, got to do all this work. A lot of those things are permanent fixes, and you're getting a lot longer holding time before your place starts making money. So yeah, does that kind of answer that, or was something I was?
That's an incredible insight too, because the price tag doesn't always mean it's a good deal for you. It's just one of the many variables you look at. So Zach, as we land this plane, as we come towards the end of our conversation today, I wanted to give you some rapid fire questions here, and I have one or two of them written down. The first one is, what is the in your area, in your market, or just investing in general, what do you classify as the most expensive part to renovate? Like, let's say it's a fixer-upper house. What's the most expensive part to renovate?
Well, so definitely a septic, definitely that. Now, if you want to say the structure of a house, or I mean like the actual house itself,
foundation, sure, yeah,
would be probably foundation.
Okay.
But within the house is definitely that. It just depends on how bad it is, but definitely foundation.
And what would you say the least expensive part is to renovate and to fix up?
Least expensive part, I would say for the most bang for your buck, because you can paint a house for pretty cheap, especially if you do it yourself. It's very cheap. But that's one thing. I always feel like I'm surprised how cheap my bathroom numbers come in there. I do very builder grade, but nice. Like mine look very styled, like they're not builder grade bathrooms, but I always get surprised how cheap they are versus my kitchens are hard to not get expensive, because nice cabinets cost money, granite costs money, nice appliances cost money, and you really can't negotiate your way out of those lower. Like you can't go do it yourself and it being amazingly cheaper. Paint, you can, little house, you can buy, 5-gallon bucket of paint and paint a house yourself, and it's whatever, $200 a 5-gallon bucket of paint costs you. So.
And it speaks to, like, in our area too, bathrooms are typically around $2,500, like on the lower end, like to fix up for, just a half bath or maybe a bathroom. Is it about that way in your market as well?
Yeah. I mean, for me, depending on what's needed, I can do a whole full bath for like $3,000, but that's because, I have guys that work with me a lot and I do enough volume that makes sense. I wouldn't budget $3,000 if I was a new investor. I'd be a minimum of 5 and high end of 10 if you have a high end property. A nice rental grade rehab, you should be 5 or under. But yeah, it just depends on who you're working with.
Awesome. Well, Zach, thank you so much for the conversation today. I really appreciate it. We are about to run out of time on my Zoom camera. So I'm going to invite everybody, check out the show notes if you want to find out where to go to contact Zach for your next investment property or conversation about investing altogether. Zach, thank you for your time.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right.